This is the Read, Write, and Create podcast, the podcast where you get a bite-sized session of creative writing coaching from me, Lori L. Tharps. I'm a storytelling evangelist who moved to the south of Spain so I could live a global literary life. I'm also an award-winning author of both fiction and nonfiction, a journalist, and a former college professor. I created this podcast because I want to help as many BIPOC writers as possible get their stories out of their heads and into the world. Are you ready? Let's go. On today's show, I'm giving you a pep talk about writing as resistance, about how you can push back against oppressive systems, defy stereotypes and limitations, and leave a lasting legacy, all with the power of the written word. And I'll be using the life and work of literary ancestor Arturo Schomburg as my source material. Arturo Schomburg is most known as the founder of the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture in New York City. But he was also a writer, a revolutionary thinker and activist who used books and the written word to defy white supremacy and glorify Black excellence and achievement. So let's get to his story. Hello, wordsmiths, storytellers, and scribes. If you're new here, thank you for joining us, and I hope that what you hear today leaves you feeling inspired and ready to write. If you're one of my returning listeners, you know I want the same exact thing for you too. I'm just very happy that you've all come to refill your cup with more stories and lessons for your literary life. Now, I want to start out by saying something before we jump into the life of Arturo Schomburg. I know that right now we are living in some very difficult times, but that's the exact reason why I created this podcast, to prepare you for difficult times, to share the stories of our literary ancestors who were writing in situations and circumstances that make today's present conditions seem like a cakewalk. Now, please do not misconstrue what I'm saying. I'm not saying what is happening today doesn't merit the fear and anxiety that I know a lot of people are dealing with right now. What I'm saying is that I'm offering these examples of our literary ancestors to give you literary role models to pattern your life after, to give you examples of what's possible, to share with you some form of hope that you can look to and actually learn real techniques and approaches for how you can keep writing even in the face of what seems like unbearable circumstances. And also how we can even extract joy and stay on purpose while we write. So, there's that saying that you can't be what you can't see. Well, that's exactly what's motivating me to keep showing you what our literary ancestors did so that you too can see you can do it too, meaning you can write even when times are hard. I'm sharing stories of real people who had real dreams that are probably similar to yours right now, of seeing their words in the world, or their dreams to use their words to dismantle oppressive systems, or to bring about more equity, justice, and compassion by writing essays and poetry, novels and plays. Maybe they too wanted to write to uplift people, to bring joy into people's lives in spite of the circumstances in which they lived in. Our literary ancestors created the blueprints that we can follow now in our own contemporary lives. That's why I'm sharing their stories. The truth is, it was our literary ancestors who really were the ones who had to step out on faith, because there was no Phyllis Wheatley before Phyllis Wheatley to show a young Black enslaved girl that her love of poetry could turn into a published book, international fame, and eventually her very freedom. There were no Native American writers who were writing about Native American people who had ever won a Pulitzer Prize. But that didn't stop N. Scott Momaday from writing the stories of his people and then winning that Pulitzer Prize. Our literary ancestors did the hard work for us. They tread the path, broke open the doors, and showed the world a glimpse of our genius. So nothing you're doing or dreaming of for your writing life is impossible. It's all been done before, so it can be done again. You just have to believe and keep writing, just like today's literary ancestor, Arturo Schomburg. So again, let's get to his story. Arturo Alfonso Schomburg was born on January 24th, 1874 in Santurce, Puerto Rico. His mother was Maria Josefa, and she was a free Black woman who originally hailed from St. Croix in the Danish Virgin Islands. Yes, the Danish Virgin Islands. I don't know if you knew that the U.S. Virgin Islands used to belong to the Danish. So yes, it was the Danish Virgin Islands. I believe it would have been what today is St. Croix, where his mother was from. She was a free woman who worked as a midwife. His father, Carlos Federico Schomburg, was a first-generation Puerto Rican of German descent. So kind of like Giselle Bundchen, the German-Brazilian model, apparently there were German immigrants who came to Puerto Rico, and Schomburg's father was a first-generation, born in Puerto Rico to these German immigrants. I think people often wonder, how does Schomburg have the name Schomburg if he was Puerto Rican? Well, now you understand. So Arturo Schomburg was born in this time in Puerto Rico. He was a curious child. He enjoyed school. But when he was in 5th grade in San Juan, a teacher told the class that there was no reason to study African history because Black people or people of African descent had never done anything worthwhile, had never done anything remarkable, and that there were no achievements of any value in the whole of Black history. So basically, this teacher is like, hey, little Arturo, your people come from nothing. It's worthless. And we should just think about Europeans because they're the only ones who have something worth studying. Supposedly, this was the moment that cemented in little Arturo's mind that he would prove that teacher wrong. And that's essentially what he did for the rest of his life. So he already had an early interest in literature. So in high school, while he was in Puerto Rico, he studied commercial printing, kind of like in a trade school situation. And then he went over to the Danish Virgin Islands and studied Negro literature, also still is part of his high school curriculum. Side note, I don't know who was teaching Negro literature in the Danish Virgin Islands in the 1890s, but I'm so interested. That's like one of those little nuggets that I'm going to have to further research for a later date. But getting back to Arturo's story, when he was 17 in 1891, Arturo Schomburg moved to New York City with his mother and quite quickly got involved in the independence movements for Cuba and Puerto Rico, which were still belonged to Spain. So he's becoming, part of these radical independence movements. He's really getting engaged, but both of those movements ended up failing in a certain way. So after the kind of collapse of the revolutionary fervor in the area, Schomburg decides to fully embrace his Black identity. He's living in Harlem, and he decides that if I'm in America, I'm going to throw my lot in with the Black Americans around me. This is when he coins the phrase Afro-Boriqueño, where he's saying, I am a Black Puerto Rican. Now, mind you, when Schomburg comes to New York City, he is fully Spanish speaking. I mean, he knew some English, but everything he was doing, he even joined a Masonic lodge, became a Mason. He joined a Spanish-speaking Masonic lodge, but he now decides, hey, I'm going to focus on my Blackness. I'm going to throw my lot in with Black Americans. He starts taking English lessons at night while teaching Spanish lessons in the daytime. But it was while he became a Mason that he decided that he really wanted to catalog the history of the Masons, particularly Black Masons, and starts writing and cataloging their history for his particular Masonic lodge. And it was at that point where he starts really getting interested in this idea of history, of cataloging history. Now, interestingly, remember, English isn't his first language. He's taking classes at night. he's really intellectually curious. He really is interested in history and wants to learn more and wants to go to university. But apparently, his records from Puerto Rico were not available or they didn't count. It wasn't clear in my research, but the point was that he could not enroll in a university in the United States. So essentially, he just declares he was going to focus on learning as much as he could on his own. Now, originally, this starts out looking about the history of the Masons, but it soon turns into a desire to document history of Black people globally. He's still smarting from the comment that fifth grade teacher made, and he's looking around New York City where the life prospects for a Black man in particular, or a Black woman for that matter, was pretty bad at this time. Just looking for a job was complicated because at the time in New York City, Black people weren't even allowed to apply for jobs that we would consider lower level jobs. They couldn't be longshoremen. They couldn't even be street cleaners or baggage handlers. They couldn't be cement carriers or garment workers. So here Schomburg is looking at this kind of desolate opportunities that were before him and still saying, you know what, I'm tired of all of the negative perceptions of Black people. So again, he throws himself into this idea that he's going to counter this negative perception by finding proof of Black excellence. Meanwhile, he does manage to find different jobs to support himself. He was able to find a selection of odd jobs, including being an elevator operator, a printer. He taught Spanish lessons. He was a porter, and he was even a clerk at a law firm. And much of the reason why he was able to find jobs was because he was able to speak more than one language. He spoke Spanish, and now he spoke English as well. And he also spoke French. So now Schomburg has found like a purpose for his life. He's doing these different odd jobs, and he's now decided, hey, I'm going to start collecting all of this Black historical memorabilia. He starts collecting artifacts, books, photos, articles, anything that he can get his hands on that proves that Black people did have a history worth documenting. And what was fascinating, probably given the fact that Arturo himself was from Puerto Rico and not from the mainland United States, was that he was looking at Black history from a global perspective. So he's collecting items that he could put his hands on from anywhere that Black people had been removed from Africa and the transatlantic slave trade. He didn't coin the term African diaspora, but he was probably one of the first people that was really looking at collective understanding of the Black diasporic experience. This is where things get interesting. So Schomburg is now fully on a mission to really build a collection of Black history and Black achievement. And so he starts going to rare bookstores and antique stores, looking and buying and finding whatever he can to document Black achievement. And so he's getting books, pamphlets, historical documents, newspapers, letters, art, whatever he can find. And he eventually gets a job, a really good job at a bank in Brooklyn called Bankers Trust Company. And not only is this a pretty good job, considering he is a Black man in the early 1900s, he was actually a supervisor there at the bank, supervising 11 white men. Yeah, which apparently was unheard of at the time. Again, he got the job because he spoke 3 languages, and he was in charge of the Department of Caribbean and Latin American Mail. So here's what my friend Arturo did. He was like, I need to collect all this different memorabilia. I mean, I'm working here at the bank, but that's not my real passion. So while he was at work, he would use the mailroom to send letters to store owners and collectors, book dealers all over the world, asking them to send him their collectibles, if you will, that had to do with Black people. So literally, he's like, you know, those of us who might work in corporate and be printing out copies of our manuscript at work because we need their printer. He was like, I'm going to use this mail system right here that I'm in charge of to send my letters out and to get stuff mailed to me. So things are getting shipped to him at work. Nobody's going to notice. He's in charge. So very smart Arturo. He's using his work environment to help him build his collection. And the reason that he was able to build his collection so quickly and amass so much is because of, you guessed it, racism. But it was working in his favor. What I mean by that is basically nobody cared about anything that Black people had done. So when Arturo would be like, hey, antiquities dealer, I see you have this newspaper that Frederick Douglass edited. Can I have it or can I buy it? They'd be like, yeah, you can have it. Nobody wants this. So he really did use that to his advantage to collect an incredible amount of artifacts. And he would also send people or find people that were in different cities and say, hey, you're going to be in Detroit. I need you to go to this particular bookstore, library, auction, and get this for me. So he was relentless in his search for Black artifacts. By the time it was about 1911, his collection was quite large, and it was pretty much housed in his house. But Schomburg was not a hoarder. He was not collecting just for the sake of collection. He wanted other people to be able to use what he had amassed. So he and another Black historian by the name of John Howard Bruce created what they termed the Negro Society for Historical Research. And this was in 1911. And so with this creation, he allowed friends and scholars and writers to come and use the materials in his collection for their work. So people like James Weldon Johnson, Carter G. Woodson, they would go to Schomburg's house where the collection was and use it for their research. Because of this, Schomburg pretty much at this point establishes himself as a Black historian, as a Black bibliophile, as a collector, to the point where he was selected to co-edit the Encyclopedia of the Colored Race in 1912 by a group of fellow Black historians. So he's building a name for himself. And here's a quote from Schomburg at around this time. He said about his rationale for collecting Black historical documents. He said, quote, "What you're calling African history, Negro history, are the missing pages of world history. Read the history of the people who took you out of history, and you will find out why they were so insecure that they had to take you out of history, why they could not stand for your history to compete with theirs," unquote. So at this point, Schomburg has clearly established himself in the world of Black historians, Black intellectuals, Black collectors, bibliophiles. But now he's got a new problem. He has this incredible collection, but again, Schomburg wasn't collecting this just to be a collector. His point was, this information needs to get out into the world. This information was meant to serve as proof that Black people had a history, that they were worth studying, that they had contributed to what we consider Western civilization and culture. So his next goal was to figure out how to disseminate this information. So the first thing he did was start lending out his materials to different schools and libraries and organizations who were creating exhibitions. So he would lend out his materials to make sure that as many people as possible could see them, use them, and appreciate them. But the other part of this was, well, these materials can only go so far. What else can I do to disseminate this information, to share what I have found, and to disprove the idea that Black people don't have a history? And that's when he said, I've got to start writing. And so at this point, Schomburg really dedicates himself to his writing career. Now, he had written previously, don't get me wrong. He had written when he was still in the revolutionary communities with the Cubans and the Puerto Ricans, but he was writing in Spanish. But now he's like, I'm going to use the written word, because he's literally collecting books and pamphlets and newspapers and recognizing how important having written documentation is. So he starts writing in earnest, and he starts writing different articles for a variety of mostly Black publications. He was writing for Marcus Garvey's Negro World, the NAACP's Crisis magazine. He wrote for The Messenger. He wrote for the Urban League's Opportunity magazine, which was like the biggest magazine at the time. Opportunity was the magazine that Zora Neale Hurston got her first big break in. He was writing for the Amsterdam News, and he even had a letter to the editor published in the New York Times. So now he's, again, turned himself to writing and getting all of this information about the collection, about what he's finding, the importance of looking up Black historical figures and events. And then he's also writing book reviews of his contemporaries, people like Claude McKay, Carter Woodson, and James Weldon Johnson. And he wrote actually a bibliography checklist of American Negro poetry. He also wrote an article for a Black book magazine called Book Studio Quarterly. So he's again highlighting the importance of literature that's coming out, being written by Black people about Black people. So if nothing else, at this point, he's really, really digging into this idea of the importance of the written word and how powerful it is for disseminating information, but also for guarding and keepsaking information. Now, it was one essay that Schomburg wrote called "The Negro Digs Up His Past" that really changed the trajectory of his future. That article promoted the artistic endeavors of Black writers. It was a real argument for the importance of Black people writing themselves into history. That essay was originally published in one magazine called Survey Graphic, but then it was selected by Elaine Locke, the editor of that seminal anthology of the Harlem Renaissance, The New Negro. Once that essay was published in The New Negro, Schomburg's reputation skyrocketed, not just in the New York literary community, but in the entirety of the United States. And it was that essay, "The Negro Digs Up His Past," that brought more attention to Schomburg by people of means. It was in 1926, a year after The New Negro came out, that the Carnegie Corporation came to Schomburg with an offer to purchase his collection of Black artifacts. Now, Schomburg was ecstatic by that because, again, his dream was to have his collection be available to as many people as possible. And sitting in his living room, that wasn't going to happen. So for $10,000, the Carnegie Corporation purchased Schomburg's full collection. That would have been about $178,000 in today's money. The materials were then donated to the New York Public Library. Now, I just want to share some of the things that were in that collection. It's unbelievable. There were more than 5,000 books, several thousand pamphlets, prints, and papers. Among them, an autographed first edition copy of poems by Phyllis Wheatley. Yes, there were handwritten poems by Paul Laurence Dunbar. Okay, there were letters written by Toussaint Louverture of the Haitian Revolution. There were speeches by Frederick Douglass, a copy of Benjamin Banneker's Early Almanac, and get this, there was a copy of the 1573 book of poems by Juan Ladino, who was considered the first Black person to ever publish a book, and he was a Black Spaniard. I'm like, what? This is freaking incredible. So I think the Carnegie Corporation, $10,000, that was a steal. I'm just salivating at the thought of all of those incredible documents that he had. And again, that people were giving them away because they didn't think they were of any value. So anyway, what did Schomburg do with his $10,000 windfall? He kept collecting. In fact, he took that money and used it to finance a trip to Europe in 1926. He went to Spain, France, Germany, Belgium, and England on one big trip to keep looking for more evidence of Black excellence in Black history throughout Europe, which again, you have to put that in context because nobody in 1926 was saying, yeah, Black people were real integral parts of European history. And Schomburg was like, of course they were. Let me go find it. And again, came back with hordes of materials. Now, when Schomburg comes back from his European trip, he's like, I'm out at the bank where he was a mailroom clerk, and he actually got hired by Fisk University to help them with their own archive and library. Then in 1932, the New York Public Library hired Schomburg to be the curator of the Division of Negro Literature and Art at the 135th Street Library. Essentially, they were hiring him to be the curator and in charge of the archive of his own materials that he had sold. So he's basically now in charge of his own collection again. And what he does in that position is continue to expand the collection. He's just not going to stop. He is still collecting more, everything. There's just endless amounts of things that he can find. And so he keeps doing that. He now spends a lot of time looking for Black artwork. He decides to go in 1932 to Cuba and gets even more art and writings and artifacts from there. And the New York Public Library is just like, yeah, do what you do. Keep going. So he's just amassing more, organizing and curating this collection. Also, during this time, he is still writing. Throughout his entire tenure at the New York Public Library, Schomburg is writing a regular weekly column for the Amsterdam News where he profiles an important historical Black figure. So my man does not stop. He is on a mission, and he's continuously aware that if he's just working behind closed doors collecting things, he's not helping change the impression of the importance of Black people and Black history. He is continuously educating using his words and writing. Sadly, Arturo Schomburg died after falling ill from a dental infection in 1938. He was only 64 years old. Thankfully, his legacy lives on, though, with his incredible collection. And side note, Schomburg also had 8 children, although one of his sons died in infancy, but his legacy lives on in his living legacy in his descendants as well. The division of the library that Schomburg was curating was changed to the Schomburg Collection of Negro Literature, History, and Prints in 1940, 2 years after his death. And that, of course, became the forerunner to today's Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture. So, what are the takeaways from Arturo Schomburg's example? How can we be like Arturo in our own writing lives? 1. Stay committed to your dreams. When you think about Arturo Schomburg, from the time he was in the 5th grade, this man made up his mind to disprove the statement of a teacher who tried to diminish him and his people. And despite the overwhelming odds stacked against him and the fact that he had no role model, no advanced degree, and an entirely racist world telling him otherwise, he held fast to his mission to document Black history on a global scale. So be like Arturo and stay committed to your dreams and your purpose. Number 2, if you have something to say to the world, use your words. Arturo Schomburg understood that if he wanted to change the perception the world had about Black people, then he needed to do more than collect. He needed a way to disseminate his information. And he used writing to do that. Articles, essays, anthologies, letters to the editor, all of it he used. So takeaway, keep writing, leave a legacy, and change the world. Number 3, this is a direct quote from Schomburg himself. He said, quote, Black people have to dig deep into their own history in order to affirm themselves in the face of ongoing oppression, unquote. So this feels kind of meta for all of you, my BIPOC writers listening. But what you're doing right now is what sustained Schomburg. You're listening to this podcast about an Afro-Boriceno writer who affirmed himself by finding those who came before him who wrote themselves or painted themselves or sang themselves into existence and into the public record. You are doing the same thing. You are finding inspiration in your literary ancestors and their accomplishments. Do not let other people define you. Write your own stories for yourself and others like you. Side note, soon after the independence movements ended and Schomburg turned his attention to the Black community and learning English, he anglicized his name. Yeah, he started going by Arthur. But towards the end of his life, specifically after his trip to Cuba, he returned to using his given name, Arturo. By finding his own history, by finding the excellence and history of his own people, he was able to affirm himself, his whole self, by seeing what his ancestors, both his Hispanic ancestors and African ancestors, and he was able to see his worth and that he came from 2 incredibly rich histories of people who contributed multitudes to the world. And he could proudly claim that and claim his true identity. Number 4, I call this a bonus. Tear down their heroes and be petty. I'm sorry. I just had to say it. I have no actual proof that Arturo Schomburg was being petty. I have no proof at all. But there's just something about his dogged tenacious way of saying, I am going to keep getting all of these materials, all of these artifacts, and uplift my people in the face of literally, I mean, think about when this man is alive. What's happening? We have the worst lynching, the introduction of the Ku Klux Klan. We have some of the most anti-Black virulent violence during American history at the time this man is doing his work, right? We're going through the Depression. He is like, yeah, so I still going to do what I'm going to do, which is focus on highlighting Black excellence, right? And I'm like, that's real ballsy, real ballsy. And then on top of that, I love it that part of Arturo Schomburg's work was to like prove as many white people as possible were actually Black. He was like, let me tear down your heroes, okay? Let me show you just how impressive Black people were. Sorry, but we fucked all of y'all, literally, by saying, look at these people who you guys consider to be the greatest expressions of like cultural genius. He's like, they were Black. Beethoven, he was Black. Pushkin, the Russian Shakespeare, Black. James Audubon, the great naturalist, Black. Now, I don't know if these people really were Black. Pushkin is, yes, Black. I mean, I wouldn't say he was Black. He had a great grandfather who was Black. But Schomburg was like telling everybody they were Black. I found out. I did the research. Almost like to say, not only were Black people excellent, but we were everywhere. He's showing people that we were everywhere. And he's also showing that even the people who you think were the best, the highest ranking people, your musicians, your scientists, they were Black. So I just feel like that was a little bit of petty on his part. I don't know if he actually believed all these people were Black. I don't know what his scientific research was based on, but I was like, he was not going to stop and he was not going to play nice. He was just going to show this is a Blackity Black world. And you non-Black people, you're just lucky to be living here with us. Drop the mic. So be like Schomburg in the way that he took on this mission of his. I'm going to leave you with his final quote from Schomburg. He said, quote, "True scholarship requires time and calm effort. Tell your stories, proclaim our glories." End quote. Thank you for listening to this award-winning podcast. I hope today's pep talk about Arturo Schomburg left you feeling inspired and more motivated to write and share the stories of your people, to push back against racism and white supremacy with your words, to be petty if you have to. I hope that his story gets you excited and motivated and feeling invincible, even in times of oppression and racism and bursts of white supremacy. Really, think about Arturo Schomburg as you sit down to write every day. If you're looking for more creative writing inspiration and useful resources for your literary life, then be sure to check out the Read, Write, and Create website at readwriteandcreate.com. Remember, that's REED, writeandcreate.com. While you're there on the website, don't forget to sign up for the Read, Write, and Create newsletter, which is the first place where you'll find out about my latest classes and creative offerings, as well as cool things to optimize and enjoy your literary lifestyle. I will leave links to them both in the show notes. Don't forget, yes, the doors are closed right now to the Read, Write, and Create Sanctuary, our private community for BIPOC women writers who take their writing seriously, but you can still add your name to the waiting list so you'll be the first to know when we start taking new applications in early 2025. I will also leave the link in the show notes. One more thing before I go. The holidays are coming up, and if you are feeling generous, like you want to give me a gift for Christmas, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, all of the above, I have made it super easy to do so. I'm not saying you need to, but maybe you're just feeling like, gee, Lori, I'd love to just buy you a coffee or maybe a Earl Grey tea with a splash of soy milk. I know you like fresh squeezed orange juice. Again, it's nothing fancy. I just want to give you something to say thank you for this labor of love of this podcast. I know you work hard. I know it costs money to make a podcast, and I just want to say thank you. So if you want to do that, I have set up a Buy Me a Coffee app, so you can just click on the link in the show notes and make a one-time donation, literally $5. $2, $3, just enough to buy me a coffee or a tea, and let me know that you appreciate what I'm doing here so that I can think of you while I am working on building up season 5 of the podcast. Thank you in advance. The Read, Write, and Create podcast is written and produced by me, Lori L. Tharps. Our editor is Brad Linder, and our theme music is by Wataboy. Until next week, keep writing. The world needs more BIPOC stories written by BIPOC storytellers just like you.